We've formed a quorum. Let's call the meeting to order. First of all, let's invite the administration team in. And at the same time, please ask the deputations to join us. Well, the administration team hasn't arrived yet. Let's call the meeting to order. Deputations, if you need to wear earpiece, please choose the panel. 0 is floor. Number 1 is Cantonese, 2 is English, and number 3 is Putonghua. Every deputation will be given 5 minutes to speak. I would like to remind the deputations that your submissions and your speeches will not be protected under the Electoral Powers and Privileges Ordinance. And also, please take note of the security measures as set out in the notes for members of the public attending meetings in conference rooms or observing meetings in the public galleries. Now, the set of notes have been attached to the letter sent to you by the Secretariat and is also being tabled. So those in the public gallery, if you want a copy of this set of notes, please ask for it from our security staff. I would like to remind deputations, if you have prepared a written submissions, please write your name on your written submissions, and before you leave, pass on your written submissions to our staff so that we can take that as a reference for us. So first of all, Mr. John Levack, please, it's your turn to speak.
Very much. Please excuse me speaking in English. The Hong Kong Venture Capital Association, who I'm representing, has requested some changes to the law from the point at which the original offshore funds tax exemption was brought out in 2007. And over the last 2 or 3 years, we've worked very closely with the Financial Services and Treasury Bureau, who have understood many of the issues, most of the issues that we have raised, and have been very cooperative in producing a draft law that we think is very effective for the private equity community. So I will make just 5 comments on, in addition to the paper that has been submitted to the members. The first comment is that private equity is actually playing a very small role in the financial services community here. We do not employ a lot of people. There are perhaps 2,000 or 3,000 people directly employed by private equity in Hong Kong. But whilst it isn't a huge number, we generate a significant amount of other opportunity for the financial sector in Hong Kong. That over the last 5 years, more than 30% of all IPOs on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange have had private equity investors. And we provide a lot of business opportunities to investment bankers, to the accounting and legal profession, to fund administrators, so that the multiplier effect of our activity is quite considerable, and the $110 billion of capital under management in Hong Kong generates a lot of fee activity for the rest of the financial services community. The second point is that the private equity industry in Hong Kong is ranked in the top 3 or 4 private equity communities in the world. It is a very substantial and leading edge part of the private equity world. And when you look at the opportunity in Asia for new investment and the track record of private equity investment in Asia to date, there is a very good grounds to believe that the industry has got plenty of room for further growth, and that Hong Kong should be the center for a lot of that growth in the future. So we are cutting edge and strong, and we need to develop only slightly to be successful. The third point is that over the last few years there have been pressure for structural change to offshore funds across the whole fund industry. So mutual funds, hedge funds and private equity funds all have reasons to believe that coming to Hong Kong and bringing funds onshore are important to their business. And for the private equity industry, it is driven by the fact that we can invest through double tax treaties into countries where we want to put our money to work. Hong Kong has a good but not excellent range of double tax treaties, but it is where we have our presence already. And the issue under double tax treaties that has started to impact firms is that for the destination countries such as China or India or Australia or South Korea, they will give benefit to firms investing into their countries where there is substance at the country of origination. And up till now in Hong Kong we have not been able to have very much substance because we could only advise from Hong Kong and we couldn't bring our funds into Hong Kong. And what we would like in the future is to be able to have both fund and manager in Hong Kong so that you have the natural substance that supports the tax benefit that we would like for our investors. The fourth point is that despite there being a real reason why people have chosen to put their key management personnel of PE firms into Hong Kong, those firms have had to create complicated structures to avoid there being management activity from Hong Kong. That inside a firm you have processes to make sure that you advise only and do not step over the line and take management decisions because of the adverse tax consequences. And that involves going on a ferry to Macau to sign a contract and coming back again, things that really are not very helpful to the efficient management of a business. And with this new legislation, we think that the efficiency will improve considerably in the way firms can operate in Hong Kong. So people will be very happy with that. So to conclude, we're strongly supportive of the changes that are proposed in this bill, which will make for greater efficiency of the PE operations that are already based in Hong Kong, which we believe will generate additional tax revenue as those firms undertake more activities and therefore will pay larger amounts of profit tax on their activities here, which will encourage new firms to come and be based in Hong Kong in the future, and which we don't think will have any impact on losses of taxation, because we don't think in the private equity sphere there are offshore funds that are today paying tax because they're managed from Hong Kong that will then avoid paying tax under this new legislation. So in conclusion, we are very, very supportive of the proposals that are being made here. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Administration, do you have any response towards Mr. Leavick's remarks? Thank you, Chairman. I'm very happy today to be able to talk to the sector, especially the Hong Kong Venture Capital and Private Equity Association. As what Mr. Leavick said, in the past 1 to 2 years, we have had a lot of discussions with the trade on this subject, and we are very happy today that this draft is presented to the Bills Committee for scrutiny.
I agree with Mr. Levac, and he, as somebody in the trade, his view on the development of the PE fund, especially as he pointed out that as of now, the number of people hired in terms of number is not particularly great, but the PE fund is actually adding a lot of value for Hong Kong, and using Hong Kong as a financial platform, listing the fund on the market, and this goes to show the potential of Hong Kong. And again, as Mr. Levac pointed out, now in the region we are not doing badly at all. But as pointed out by the trade, there are certain unclear situations at the moment in the legislation, resulting in some, certain complications. And with the proposed amendment, particularly targeting the offshore PE funds and the exemptions for those PE funds, exemptions for the profits tax. Now, we are hoping that by doing so, we can meet the needs of the trade so that they have a definite mechanism to benefit from the tax exemption. And in terms of our tax revenue, we will be protected from abuses or loopholes. So I believe that the proposals listed in our papers, including the qualified funds, these have actually these are results of extensive discussion with the trade, and I believe we have struck the right balance. And on the whole, we are happy to see the trade supporting this, and we hope to see this pass through LegCo as soon as possible. And again, as Mr. Levac pointed out, the development can lead to Hong Kong as a hub for the PE funds, and allowing professional managers to manage those funds, and then using Hong Kong again as a platform to reach out to the rest of the world. Thank you, Chair. Now, we would like the administration to give us a written submission for from all the parties who have made submissions. Now, I would like to ask members whether you have any questions. Mr. Leung, you have 5 minutes.
Under the industry generally welcomes the direction of the proposed Inland Revenue Amendment Bill, which gives profits tax exemption for certain types of private equity, offshore private equity funds investing in private companies. And of course, I mean, this is quite a technical bill. And in your view, and I understand that you have been involved with the discussion on the detailed proposals of the bill, but is there any technical amendments which you think the government could have done better in terms of this draft? And if you do have a view on that, could you please let us know what is your view on the more technical side of this bill, please?
Ask for everything, which we know we can't get. The bill is very good. In terms of the implementation of it, one of the key elements will be the IRD's practice notes as to how matters will be treated in detail, which is a a further discussion that I'm sure we will have with the IRD, and the relationship with the IRD is very strong, so we hope that that will be a constructive process. In terms of the two things that we would really have liked to have seen included in the bill that are not there as it stands, the first is that the way it is structured is that it allows an offshore fund to invest anywhere but in Hong Kong. And the implication of that, as we take it at the moment, is that if you make a Hong Kong investment, it can taint the whole of the tax benefit for the fund. And on the whole, we believe that private equity investment can be good for the companies that we invest in, that it is putting new money into those companies, and often it is to allow those companies to expand and add more jobs and to develop. And we think that Hong Kong should be encouraging private equity to invest in those Hong Kong companies rather than making it difficult. And from our side, we would strongly prefer the bill to say that if you do make an investment from your offshore fund into a Hong Kong company, then that investment be treated for tax in the normal way that Hong Kong would treat an offshore investment in a company for tax, but the rest of the fund be allowed to be untainted by that investment, so that if you typically have 15 investments and 1 or 2 of those is in Hong Kong, then those shouldn't affect the 13 odd that are remaining outside, and for it to be clear. So that is the first thing which we think would be good for Hong Kong. We understand that there are issues about whether that is a system that could be abused, which is a concern for the Financial Services Bureau and IRD, but we would prefer to see that taken out and allowed, investment allowed in Hong Kong companies. And I would stress that this would also apply to venture capital. And Hong Kong has quite a dynamic, young, entrepreneurial, IT-related sector at the moment, which is going to need capital. And if the venture capital firms that participate with using offshore funds are going to find it difficult to invest in Hong Kong, that is going to be a cost to Hong Kong. So that is the first technical detail that we would raise. The second is that Hong Kong is developing as a base for big multinational investors, such as sovereign wealth funds, such as some of the large pension funds, and some state-owned enterprises, particularly Chinese state-owned enterprises, which do not qualify as qualifying funds because they don't have at least 6 investors, despite the fact that they encompass many individuals' interests. And if there was a technical way that those could be included, that would be a great benefit as well, because as a centre, Hong Kong really benefits from those people choosing to base their operations here. Thank you.
Mr. Mok.
Actually, I'm not sure whether you might have answered part of my question in your previous answer, but I might have been a little bit not paying attention. I'm not sure whether I caught exactly what that is. But essentially, my question was that when during the first meeting of this subcommittee, I actually raised a concern that because the current arrangement is such that the government is proposing to provide tax exemption, further tax exemption for funds that are investing in offshore activities or offshore companies. Of course, we understand that that is going to be very helpful for the development of the financial services industry and the asset management of fund management companies and that industry and so on. But of course, there are, as you know, the government is right now trying to also developed the technology and IT and entrepreneurial activities in Hong Kong. And there was, I expressed a bit of concern whether or not this would attract more funds to be invested offshore because of this reason. And in a way, not going to be very helpful for the local companies, local entrepreneurs that are actually looking for funds and finding it rather difficult at the moment because of our relatively immature or not as well developed as we like to see as far as the venture capital market is concerned. So I wonder if you can share your views about whether that would really be the case, or it is not exactly a problem at all. Would you believe that that is actually a problem, or would you rather see that local activities are also exempted? Of course, that would be that might be going a little bit too far. I don't know as far as the tax regime is concerned. But do you think this sort of change may entice more funds to actually go out of Hong Kong rather than being invested in local companies?
That's a very good question. I didn't address it properly in my first answer. If this bill gets passed as it stands, and if I'm now able to be a manager here, the consequence of the bill is that it is easier for me to direct my capital offshore into a non-Hong Kong business than it is for me to direct it into a Hong Kong business, which is a very strange outcome. And as an association, we like you, believe that there is a real opportunity to support the entrepreneurialism of Hong Kong that is growing nicely at the moment, but is still small and is going to need capital. My colleagues who are much more technically proficient than I am in the industry tell me that if you want to invest from your offshore fund into a Hong Kong entity, there are ways in which you could structure it, effectively create another vehicle of the fund outside in the Cayman, and that would then invest into a Hong Kong company, and the rest of the fund would be invested outside, and you would then have a different relationship with that Cayman entity which was investing in Hong Kong, where you would only advise it again. So we go back to the circumstances of playing this split between advising and managing, such that we're a creative industry. We will pay quite a lot of fees to advisors to allow us to do what we want to do. But part of the purpose of this amendment is to simplify and make easier the investment of offshore funds by managers based in Hong Kong. And for investments in Hong Kong, it will be complicated again for us. So we can still do it, but it will not have the benefit of the simplification that is coming through today, which is an irritation rather than damaging the purpose. Our view is that you could address that by saying that an investment in a Hong Kong company is allowed, but it's outside of the benefit of this, but it doesn't taint the rest of the fund. The FSDB is concerned about abuse possibilities there. But to simplify the answer, yes, we could still invest in Hong Kong companies, but it's harder than investing in a Chinese company.
Now, should I queue again, or can I follow up, Chair? Do I have to queue again? Now, let's see if there are other members wanting to ask for first round. Otherwise, we proceed to round two, and starting with Mr. Leung Kai-Cheong, please.
The government to respond to this point raised by Mr. Levac about the tainting of a qualified fund, because what I get from you is that if an offshore fund, if part of the offshore fund, no matter how much, I think that's the minimum threshold, invest in a Hong Kong private company, then the whole of the fund would be automatically disqualified from being an eligible offshore fund to be entitled to the profits tax exemption under this regime. Is my understanding correct? But I don't see the rationale, because if only say about 15% of the whole fund is investing, a passive investor in a Hong Kong company, why should they hold this 15% of investment taint the whole fund, and thereby resulting in the whole fund being disqualified from being an eligible fund? Mr. Chairman, I think I would like the government to give a reply to that.
Administration, please.
This question, again in Chinese perhaps, but just for the sake of John, I think we've discussed this issue time and again during our exchange of views over the past year or so. I understand the concern and the demand of the industry. Again, we would like to do the most for the industry, as John put it at the beginning of this meeting. Yet, on the other hand, we do need to consider any possibility for abuse or leakage of taxation revenue for that proposal. So again, back to the key point is there are 2 points that we are concerned about. It may venture into a bit of technicality that I would perhaps seek the assistance of Mr. Chiu from RRD to explain later on. But the two major points here is the risk of onshore funds seeking to re-domicile and become offshore funds and enjoy the tax benefit, which may not be difficult to do so if we allow the situation that John just mentioned, that within a fund, a certain element, a proportion of it is allowed to invest into Hong Kong companies or make investment into Hong Kong, then RD in their practical experience consider that may not be something very difficult to do so. The second consideration is that the definition of a non-resident, which is now the key point of this regime, would include not only funds but also natural persons. So these are two major angles that would make the way that we can devise a scheme to cater for what the industry is asking very difficult. We will keep considering it, but then it will be quite a difficult task to achieve having the 2 points. If I may just recapture that a little bit in Chinese, is that
we believe that if we allow that within the offshore fund, a certain proportion of it can be invested in Hong Kong companies, and it is still subject to the tax rules, either exemption or have to pay a tax. It is difficult to make a differentiation or distinction. And also, we have a wide definition for non-resident entities, including natural persons and funds, etc. And also, in the daily experience of the IRD, it believes that loopholes may be created, especially for funds or persons registered in Hong Kong. They can try to become offshore funds and enjoy the tax exemption. So based on these two considerations, we believe that the current proposal has struck the right balance. Mr. Kenneth Leung, do you have anything to add? I will be very long-winded. Perhaps I'll let Mr. Charles Smock speak first, and I will wait for the third round. Mr. Charles Smock. Thank you, Chairman.
Follow up with Mr. Levick about your reply, your response to my question. First of all, it's great to hear that the local fund investment industry would be interested in supporting local industry, local companies, and so on. But I did hear from your response that you think that some of your more technical colleagues had been saying that there might be ways to sort of in a way get around the whole thing by investing in a local company that might be, I mean, through various ways of arrangement, that they might be, the investment target might be a Cayman Island company, but in the end, part of the operation or whatever would actually be a Hong Kong company. Now, if that's the case, I wonder if the administration would actually consider that to be a loophole, first of all, and second, is there a more proper way that you would suggest for this particular bill to handle that sort of situation? Because, I mean, at least from my point of view, from where I'm coming from, what I would like to see is that, we're not drawing money, funds that are in Hong Kong because of this particular tax benefit reason to be invested outside of Hong Kong, which to me is only helping maybe the fund managers, that industry, but it doesn't help the rest of Hong Kong's economy.
Hong Kong is an open economy and encourages foreign investment. And effectively, if a foreign entity, be it a person or a corporate or a limited partnership, makes an investment in a Hong Kong company and holds that investment for a number of years, which is, in our case, typically 3 to 7 years, and then sells it, our supposition is that it would be then taxable in Hong Kong just as any foreign investment should be taxed. And we would make a claim that that should be treated as a capital gain, because a long-term investment held for 3 to 7 years and then sold is pretty much what a capital gain is. And there is a zero rate of tax on capital gains. So in terms of the tax treatment, Hong Kong is actually quite beneficial to a foreign entity investing in it. And what this change in the exemption does is it just means you structure it as a foreign investment rather than part of your fund. Which introduces some complexity, but is not a major problem for a firm to do. It would, in our view, be simpler to allow it to be part of the fund and tax each investment as Hong Kong sees fit to tax it, without tainting the rest of the fund. But it's not my job to defend Hong Kong from the loopholes that I may not be aware of. So I can't argue on the technicalities with the IRD on that.
Okay. Would Chairman, may I actually also ask the administration whether they would consider this sort of arrangement to be proper? I mean, the ones that Mr. Levick talked about, that investing in probably a foreign vehicle, but it may have to do with ultimately a Hong Kong company operating in Hong Kong.
The administration, do you have any response?
I think we will not venture into case-specific comments, but I think it's general principles.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. Maybe I say a few words about the example mentioned by John. Now, basically, under the offshore fund regime for private equity funds, the offshore private fund can only be allowed to invest in companies, private companies, not doing business in Hong Kong and not holding any Hong Kong immovable properties. This is the basic idea. Now, the question is whether you can structure your fund in such a way that you can do other business. I think it all depends on the facts of each case. Now, I think it's very, it wouldn't it would not be too appropriate for me to jump into a certain conclusion saying whether a particular structuring of the investment is proper or not proper. It all depends at the end of the day how the terms of the agreement is being drafted, how the structuring is being done. I think this is a factual issue and depends on the facts of each case.
Any other member wishing to ask a question? Mr. Kenneth Lang.
Follow up one point mentioned by the administration in my previous question. Talking about, not allowing any offshore fund to invest in Hong Kong portfolio, because one of the drawbacks identified by the Inland Revenue is that if the bill does allow an offshore fund to invest in a Hong Kong private company or a Hong Kong portfolio, the administration, one of the concern is that for the funds already operating or established in Hong Kong, it would trigger off a trend of these funds to re-domicile into another jurisdiction. Is that one of your concern? It's the first concern you raised. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes, but we will not say it will trigger off, but there is the possibility and the risk that they can allow such an option to exist. I think that's my response.
But I cannot see in real situation that is the case, because if the Hong Kong domicile funds can be easily re-domiciled in another jurisdiction, they would do so. And the chance that a offshore fund investing in Hong Kong, companies getting taxed, I think, in reality, is quite low as long as they get the structure correct. That is my personal experience as well. So I don't see a real leakage here. I think maybe the government is being too prudent in structuring this bill. That is my comments. But of course, I don't think I can persuade you to listen to my my friend here in the industry to provide another more user-friendly draft. But I do want the committee here to take down this point. And the other point, which I think many of us have mentioned, not just the Honourable Charles Mott, not just Mr. Levac, is that there must be a regime, I think, in maybe your next wave of legislation to allow funds to invest passively in Hong Kong startup companies and get, the same type of, tax exemption. Because this is only good for the long-term development of startups in Hong Kong. I'm not talking about running business in Hong Kong, which is quite clearly a separate case. But if you got funds investing passively in Hong Kong offshore funds, then I do not know why. Of course, you may tell me, and I had this conversation with the administration before, that there's not enough time at this juncture to consider such a big piece of legislation. But I do think it would only be beneficial to Hong Kong. And I think the legislators across the spectrum would agree that this type of exemption is necessary in order to diversify the economic base of Hong Kong. And I want also this point to be, taken into record, and maybe the administration can have a brief response as well.
Okay,
yes. We note the views of the Honourable Kenneth Lang. As we explained before, to do so would incur quite a wide-ranging sort of policy implications and considerations. We would, of course, also attach a lot of importance and actually emphasis on developing the, for example, the startups industry in Hong Kong. And members may be aware that even in the recent budget announced by the Financial Secretary, there has been injection of funds to sponsoring startups in Hong Kong, if I remember correctly, that's 5 billion into that amount into supporting the development of startups in Hong Kong. So there are many means. Meanwhile, we have also been seeing investment into startups firms in Hong Kong, whether it's in the fintech area or other area. Of course, taxation is a measure or something that can be facilitative. But given the wide-ranging implications of the idea mentioned by the Honourable, we will have to consider it in far greater detail. So that's why we are proposing to take the present proposal forward first, and then in the longer run to consider other options.
仲有冇議員要提問嘅？
Any other questions from members? Mr. Levac, any further views from you, Mr. Levac, please?
Is that what we have is a big step forward, and I'm not sure in this chamber I should say, but we're inclined to pocket it. But what I would like to emphasize is that as a little sector of the financial services world, we have a further ask that we want to put on the table, which is that we have funds brought on shore here. And I think that is more of an important issue than this one. We have already been discussing this with the administration and getting positive feedback. And my sense is that there should be another opportunity soon to address this issue as part of a wider picture. And if we have that understanding, I'm very much encouraged that we can get it right, that we can make sure that there is good access to the offshore capital for Hong Kong businesses and Hong Kong startups and entrepreneurs. And my inclination would be to say, let's move ahead with this now, and at the next round, make sure that we find the right way to accommodate Hong Kong companies accessing offshore capital in a sensible way.
好，如果冇
Okay, now if members have no further views, I would draw a line here. And today we are happy and thankful to Mr. John Levac for attending today's meeting. And Mr. Levac, if you do have further views, please feel free to let us know. So, Mr. Levac, please feel free to excuse yourself, and we will continue with the meeting. Okay, we will continue with the issues raised on the 28th of April and 849/1415/02 and issued to members earlier. Can I ask the administration to briefly take us through the paper? Now, the paper is actually related, or in fact overlap with the previous discussion, including the management of the PE funds. We see that in Hong Kong, at the moment, in our region, we are ranked among the top and second only to the mainland, and we are talking about 20 to 21% of the asset value. Now, for the offshore PE funds, now, I believe the earlier discussion has shed light on the issue, and I'm not going to repeat. Now, when we do move on to the clause-by-clause scrutiny, then we can take those questions together. Okay, now on the legal advisor raised the content. These have been covered in the paper 849, 14 to 15, bracket 03, paper 04 as well. And this is the administration's response to the question raised by the legal advisor in the letter dated May 4th, 2015. Now, if members wish to speak, you will have 5 minutes, so that's ample time to please indicate your willingness to speak by putting your hands up. Now, I don't see any hands raised, or do I? Mr. Leung Kai-Cheung, can I ask, through you, Mr. Chairman, the administration to explain the answer given to us, Clause 8. I have nothing further to add on Clause 5, but can you please ask the administration to explain Clause 8? That's the letter dated May 4th. Chair, I'll ask Mr. Chiu to explain. Thank you, Chair. Clause 8 refers to an English term, bona fide, widely held. Now, simply put, now the fund is held by many people. Now we have a targeted anti-tax evasion arrangement. Now, if there is an offshore fund does have a Hong Kong individual taking up more than 30%, the fund, if being cashed out, the 30% will be taxable. Now, we do not wish a Hong Kong person trying to evade tax via an offshore fund. Now, we have some sort of a safe haven arrangement. Now, if the fund is genuinely a bona fide, widely held, and even if you have more than 30%, now the earlier anti-evasion law will not apply. Now, what is the actual meaning of this bona fide, widely held? Now, in our guidelines, we have number 20 and 43 of the DIPN. If it's widely held, we are talking about that at no time did fewer than 50 persons or 50 investors holding it, or at no time during the year did fewer than 21 persons hold directly or indirectly 75% or more. Now, if these are true, then the term bona fide, widely held will be established. Now, is there any further explanation for this technical point? Now, the IRD's stance is that these wordings have been in use for a long time. They are not new, and it has been used in our DIPN for a long, long time. So there is no need, in our view, to redefine the term. Okay, yes, point taken. Now, if the fund is genuinely bona fide, widely held, and if somebody does own 30%, you will not apply the deeming provision. Now, am I understanding you correctly? And how does that compare with the 2006 exemption clause? Now, even if you have this term, bona fide widely held, the person does have 30% holding, why do you exempt him from round tripping, as it were? It seems a bit odd to me. I don't quite understand, because he or she does hold 30% after all. Now, the design you referred to in 2006, we considered an actual situation. Even though the fund was offshore, the investor cannot really judge the percentage he or she is holding, because it fluctuates. So the design of the wording is that it's a kind of a targeted tax evasion kind of wording. And if the fund does not really encourage people to evade tax, it's only a kind of safe haven arrangement. Any further from you? No, not for the time being. Now, any other members wants to speak? Now, otherwise, we will start our clause-by-clause scrutiny. So can the administration take the lead? Madam Ho, please. I'll suggest using the markup copy on page 1 on 20AB, the definition, the interpretation. Now, this will and then we move on to pages 2 and 3, 4 and 5. Now, the present arrangement is that the special purpose vehicle will have several other possibilities, and we are proposing adding 4D and 5D. So let's continue. Page 4 of our markup copy, and this refers to 20AC, to the conditions to be fulfilled, and we are proposing that if one of the following is satisfied, then there is exemption. And that is to say, we have added what is actually a qualified person or fund. Now, 5B is added, and it will say that the ordinance applies to transactions carried out within the period from 1st of April 2015 to the day before that date of commencement. So this ties in with the tax year. Mr. Leung Kai-Chiang, can I just ask about 20AC? 2B, Roman 1 and 2. Why is it that either of the following conditions is satisfied and not both? Am I right? This is either or. Is that right? It is, yes, either of the two. Because we've received from the trade that certain PE funds does not need to be a specified person. So really, to help the trade, making it easier, we have the second condition: non-resident person is a qualifying fund. So I would be explaining the qualifying meaning later on.
最主要條件就係一個 qualified fund 已經得一個 non-resident person。
仲要係2A， 佢係做一個係個指明交易。第二首先當然佢係一個非居港者啦。第二佢要做個2A 係一個指明交易。
2A sets out that it is a non-resident person. Shouldn't 2B2 suffice? If you are a non-resident person, a qualifying fund, and you carries out a specified transaction, that should be meeting the conditions. I don't know why you have the need for B1. Why is that clause there? Well, this is the existing provision because that the exemption started in 2006. For example, hedge funds can be carried out by specified persons. Yes, understand. Please go on. From pages 5 to 12. And that has to do with the definitions on section 20AC. On page 10, we have a definition of what we mean by qualifying fund, and that reflects the typical characteristics of PE fund, and that is a collective investment vehicle involving a number of investors, and it is not just funds owned by the manager. So to be a qualifying fund, it means that at all times after the final closing of sale of interest, the number of investors exceeds 4, and the capital commitments made by investors exceed 90% of the aggregate capital commitments. And another condition is that the portion of the net proceeds arising out of the transactions of the fund to be received by the originator and the originator's associations, after deducting the portion attributing to their capital contributions, is not to exceed 30% of the net proceeds. We have made explanations on the qualifying fund. On page 12, we have mentioned about what we mean by final closing of sale of interest. There is a clear definition here, because after that date, there may be change in the amount of capital and also the investors. We also set out what we mean by net proceeds, associated partnership, associated corporations, associates, etc., so that we understand what we mean by qualifying fund. From pages 12 to 15, that has to do with special purpose vehicles, SPH, because PE funds often set up SPVs to hold their equity. So we added in the 28CA, that has to do with the certain profits of SPVs. So an SPV and an interposed SPV is exempted from payment of tax. And we also come up with a definition of accepted private company, and that means a private company incorporated outside Hong Kong, and that it should be incorporated outside of Hong Kong. That is to prevent abuse of the tax exemption by local companies or local funds, and that they will try to set up offshore fund to evade tax. And also, at all times within the 3 years before a transaction, the EPC did not carry on any business through or from a permanent establishment in Hong Kong, and it should not hold any immovable property in Hong Kong. To prevent abuse, the portfolio company must not hold share capital in one or more private companies carrying on any business through or from a permanent establishment in Hong Kong. To provide more flexibility, we have a de minimis rule amounting to no more than 10% of the value. On page 15, we have also provided a definition of SPV. Means a corporation, partnership, trustee of a trust estate or any other entity that is wholly or partially owned by a non-resident person, established solely for the purpose of holding and administering one or more accepted private companies, is incorporated, registered, or appointed in or outside Hong Kong. Legal advisor. Mr. Kenneth Leung, I have a simple question. Special purpose vehicles, the definition. Have you defined what legal form or entity is acceptable? We said that it is corporation, partnership, trustee of a trust estate or any other entity. What do you mean by any other entity? That's what I want to know. Administration? SPV? The most common form is a corporation. Sometimes it can be a partnership or a trust. Entity is quite a wide concept. It's a sort of residue here. Any entity, maybe that refers to an arrangement whereby there will be specified holders. And so the entity covers a wide definition. Any arrangement which can be a contractual arrangement. An example is an foundation, overseas foundation. But for PE fund, that is seldom seen. But as I said, this is a catch-all term. Well, I understand now. Well, this is going to be technical. I want to follow up. In some contractual arrangements, for example, in France and Belgium, trust schemes, there may be such a contractual arrangements. If there is such contractual arrangement in continental countries, you would consider that as an acceptable SPV. Is that right? Chairman, the SPV is a wide definition. It's really to help the trade so that they can choose any types or forms of SPVs. Any follow-up? If not, then let's continue. Our legal advisor, Chairman. Accepted private company, EPC, item C, it says that equivalent to no more than 10% of the value of its own assets. 10% of the value of its own assets. How do you calculate that? For example, the EPC may own some assets in Hong Kong and overseas. Would all these assets be counted? Another question is, if EPC has a subsidiary company, and if a subsidiary holds certain assets, will that also be taken on board in its calculation of this 10%? Who to take that question? Mr. Chiu. Let me try to explain how, in effect, we will implement this provision. Well, we look at the EPC statement of accounts and the balance sheet. Let me use, say, immovable property as an example. It cannot hold directly Hong Kong's immovable property in Hong Kong, but it can hold an immovable property in another company. And the equivalent share capital should not be over 10% of the value of its own assets. That means this EPC can hold a share in another company, and then this company has an immovable property in Hong Kong. So we will look at whether that value of that immovable property will exceed 10% of its own assets. Okay, let's move on. Page 15. We mentioned about the definition of EPC, and one of the conditions is that it does not carry out any business through a permanent establishment in Hong Kong. So we are providing a definition of permanent establishment of private company here. For a private company, a permanent establishment is a fixed place of business through which activities of the company are carried out. And offshore funds may carry out some sort of commercial activities in Hong Kong, and such activities will not involve significant tax liability in Hong Kong. So in subsection 3, we said that even if there is business of the company, if it is just for a preparatory purpose, ancillary purpose, for example, for storage of goods, then this kind of business venue will not be considered as permanent establishment. Mr. Kenneth Leung, would you be issuing an interpretation note on what do you mean by preparatory or ancillary business? Would you follow the OECD guidelines or what? Would you be giving detailed guidelines on that? After the bill is enacted, we will do this DPIN, explaining how we will implement the ordinance. Permanent establishment. Well, we have taken reference from the wording used by OECD. In other words, they reflect OECD's views on permanent establishment. But if needed, in our DPIN, we will further elaborate. All right. Legal advisor. SPV. It says that it's wholly or partially owned by a non-resident person. Does it include both direct or indirect holding? Yes, it covers both. Okay, so let's move on. Page 17. We like to amend the original 2080 to add in B, and that is any loss sustained by SPV as defined by Section 20 ACA from a transaction referred to in an earlier section in a year of assessment in which this SPV has not any time carry on any trade is not available for set-off against its assessable profits. 28E it says that the assessable profits of non-resident persons regarded as assessable profits of resident persons, i.e. the deeming provisions. So, resident person holds beneficial interest of over 30% of the fund. It means that the profits will be subject to tax. And this deeming provision will also apply to overseas PE fund. And then pages 20 to 21. And because in 20 AC, we have provided definitions of associates. So we are just deleting the definitions here. Page 22 to 25. And that has to do with the new 28F. And it is modeled after 28E on the deeming provisions, and that is if the resident person holds a beneficial interest of over 30% of the overseas PE fund, and then it also holds a beneficial interest of the SPV, then the SPVs, the assessable profits of the SPV held by residents will be regarded as assessable profits of resident persons. Pages 26 to 28. Schedule 15, provisions for ascertaining amounts of assessable profits of resident person under Section 28E. We are making minor corresponding changes here. 29 to 32. This is a new Schedule 15A, and that is drawn up based on Schedule 15. And 15 has to do with the provisions for ascertaining amounts of assessable profits of resident persons under Section 28E. Pages 33 to 36. We are proposing amending the definitions of securities. Securities here. We would be including the transactions of PE funds, including definite securities. So specified transactions include transactions as securities for funds, and they should also be subject to the tax exemption. So for pages 37, we are making minor amendments related to the earlier schedule.
If there are no further views from members, this wraps up the clause-by-clause scrutiny. Yes, legal advisor. Can I ask about the private company's definition? Now, the present wording is that only those established in Hong Kong as statutory bodies, and to invite. Now, the wording is that they would not be allowed. Now, what about what is the meaning of not being allowed? Now, who would actually stop them, and where or when would this clause apply? Yes. Now, let me supplement. Now, for this private company, now, if you look at it from two angles, first of all, private companies in Hong Kong, and we know the Hong Kong legislation very clearly. Now, but those outside Hong Kong, or that portion outside Hong Kong, we have to look at the overseas jurisdiction and how it handles that kind of private company, whether public fundraising is allowed. And we will use that to judge whether the company is in fact a private company. Any follow-up? Thank you, Chair. Now, that being the case, if it's an overseas private company, you will look at the prevailing legislation at that jurisdiction. And what about looking at the documents pertaining to that company, or do you simply look at the jurisdiction of where the company resides? Now, if there is a constitution or other memorandum, we will also look at that as well. If there are no further views, we finish the clause-by-clause scrutiny. We thank Mr. Leung and Mr. Mok for all your very good questions. Can I ask the government, now, do you have plans or timetable to resume Stage 2 amendment, and then to move to the next step? Do you have any timetable? No, thank you, Chair, and thank you, members, for your precious input in this clause-by-clause stage. Now, we will try to match the overall timetable and resume debate ASAP. Now, we will provide written submissions as initiated by the Chair. And we believe we can do that pretty quickly. And we can liaise with the Secretariat and to find the best time. We will try to expedite things, but certainly we will work with the major time frame. Okay, there being no other business, I adjourn the meeting.